Welcome back with my top 25 all-time favorite artists of all time. As of today, those things can change a bit from time to time, plus some honorable mentions as usual. Quick disclaimer, I grew up in a kind of working class environment in the 80s, early 90s, so there's going to be a bit of a female underrepresentation. I'm aware of that, but that this list, I wanted to do it as honest as possible, and most of these artists go back a long time for me. There are at least 10, 15, maybe 20 of those 25 artists I'm a fan of for as long as I can remember, from when I was a teenager or even before that. And back in those days where I grew up, there wasn't really much talk about equal, male-female equality. But I can see that, I can see my wrong doing here. But, I wanted to make this honest, and these were the 25 artists I came up with, from intuition, with not thinking too much into it, but straight from the heart, so to speak. But first, some honorable mentions. Make it quick: Pulp, Blur, The Kinks, Slade, T-Rex, Dexys Midnight Runners, Lightning Seeds. Those are all bands that I really love, and I have probably the whole discography of those artists, and many good memories with these bands. But with each of those bands, there's something that prevented it from being a top 25 all-time artist for me. Some of those groups, I think those are all groups and no solo artists, all of those groups, or some of those groups are really more single-oriented. To qualify as a top 25 artist, you also should have at least 1, 2, 3, or even more album masterpieces. In my case, because I'm an album lover. I also like singles. I like hits of my favorite artists. But when it push comes to shove, I'm really a fan of the album. The entity of an album. And for some of those artists, it could be said that they're not really album artists. Especially bands like Slade, even Lightning Seeds, Dexys Midnight Runners to an extent. T-Rex has 1 or 2 really great albums, but first and foremost a singles band. There are going to be 1 or 2, or maybe even 3 more single-oriented bands also in the top 25, but then I would, those bands are really dear to my heart, so I have a reason to put them in there. So without much further ado, my 25th favorite artist of all time is Curtis Mayfield, as of today. And I'm going to tell you my favorite song and favorite album, as of today, for all of those artists. My favorite song by Curtis Mayfield, it's not very original, it's one of his biggest classics. It's Move On Up from the Curtis album, the self-titled album. And my favorite album would be Superfly, the album Superfly. Number 24 is, that's usually when I'm ranking one of those artists, it's really the artist. But there are 2 exceptions when it's a bit of a broader take on an artist, and 24 is one of those. It's Paul Weller, but I've decided to also count his band, so it's Paul Weller plus The Jam plus Style Council, because if it would be just Paul Weller solo, it wouldn't make my top 25. It would just be The Jam, it wouldn't make my top 25. And if I just would make Style Council, also wouldn't be enough for the top 25. But all of that combined, and he's the songwriter and the singer of all those groups, plus solo career. So I think I can make this, and then he's a top 25 artist to me, Paul Weller plus The Jam and the Style Council. My favorite of those 3 entities is the Style Council. That's my favorite phase of his career. When I became a fan of him, I first started to become a fan of him in the mid-90s when Britpop happened, and I first got into his mid-90s solo albums, Wildwood, the self-titled one, and then especially Stanley Road. And then I became a fan of the Jam. And when I first listened to the Style Council, I thought that I liked the Style Council the least. But the longer, the more and more time passed, Style Council, that the stock of Style Council got higher and higher, and the other things didn't go down but stayed the same. And finally, for the past 10 years, I would say Style Council. I listened most often, I would listen to Style Council more often than to the Jam or Paul Weller in the last years. But at the beginning I really was a Paul Weller solo and the Jam fan. My favorite song by Paul Weller is by the Jam. It's from the second album, All Mod Cons. It's down in the tube station at midnight, the album version. And my favorite album, I've mentioned it already, is Stanley Road from 1995. Great solo album. My 23rd favorite artist is going to be the most indie, most underground act on today's list, I would say. It's of Montreal, who are not from Montreal, they're from the USA. Great, weird, psychedelic indie band. First albums came out in the late 90s, or around the year 2000, I would say. And they started as a kind of a weird folk, psych folk, anti-folk group, but became more and more electronic, and the albums became more and more eclectic and wild and weird and punky and psychedelic. And I like almost I wouldn't say like almost everything they did. I think they hit the peak like 10 to 15 years ago, and the albums they made in the past 10 to 15 years I didn't like that much anymore, but they're still a great band, especially a great live band also. But my favorite album would be Hissing Fauna, Are You the Destroyer? And my favorite song is also from that album. I think it's from 2007 or 2006, that album. My favorite song is, and I have to read it because all the song titles are so weird, We Are Born the Mutants Again with Leafling, whatever that means. Number 22, Stevie Wonder, from a very very underground group to a big mainstream act. Stevie Wonder. Favorite song is the medley of As and Another Star from the Songs in the Key of Life album, and that's also my favorite album by Stevie Wonder. Number 21, Belle and Sebastian from Scotland, Glasgow. Favorite song, The Loneliness of a Middle Distance Runner, which is on No album. It was on an EP in the late 90s, I would say. Again, around the year 2000 it must have been. On No album, but brilliant song. And my favorite album would be Fold Your Hands, Child, You Walk Like a Peasant, which isn't, usually the favorite album by Belle and Sebastian. Fans of Belle and Sebastian are usually either Tiger Milk, If You're Feeling Sinister, Boy with the Arab Strap, Dear Catastrophe Waiter. So it's not one of those albums that are usually the number one album, but it's my favorite album of theirs. Number 20, that's one of those, at the beginning with the honorable mentions, I told you I'm more of an album guy, so single-oriented groups, it's really tough for them to get into my top 25 or get into my heart, to be, that I'm really a hardcore fan of those groups. But this is one of those exceptions. It's Madness, arguably a band that never really had a album masterpiece. They had 2 or 3 very good albums, I would say, but not really an masterpiece, a consensus record, but one of the best single bands of all time, and especially in the early 80s, maybe one of the 2 or 3 best bands in the world, I would say. Number 19, it's a bit of a strange case, Brigitte Bardot, not really remembered as a singer or as a musician. She's more famous as an icon, as a sex symbol, but also as an actress. Actress, that was her main profession, one would say. But I really love her music. Some of the best songwriters and session musicians, producers, arrangers of France in the 60s and early 70s wrote, arranged, produced, performed for her, and she sang with a really sweet voice, I would say. Even Serge Gainsbourg wrote some of her songs, some of her best songs. And yeah, I'm really a fan of her music. I'm also a fan of Serge Gainsbourg, but didn't make my top 25, I have to say. My favorite song of Brigitte Bardot is La Matraque from 1963. And the favorite album is called Bebe, BB, from 1966, I think. Number 18, Neil Young. You know, it's a very usual suspect on a list of favorite artists of all time, especially if you know with musical taste like mine. So maybe number 18 isn't really that high for him. Maybe some of you expected him to be higher. But you know, number 18 is okay, I would say. I have phases, you know, there are phases when he would be probably a top 15, maybe even top 10 artist for me. But right now I'm not really in a Neil Young phase. Favorite song, Going Back. And favorite album is the album where Going Back is the opener from. You know, Going Back is the opener of that album. The album is Comes a Time. Don't remember from which year, I think 78 or 79. It's from the late 70s. And it's one of those folky, it's the folky Neil Young. But I also like the electric Neil Young, of course. Number 17, Chic, the disco group Chic. Favorite song, I Want Your Love. And favorite album is C'est Chic, and I Want Your Love is from that album, C'est Chic. One of the most underrated albums of all time, I would say. It was a big success, but I think with critics and in the general perception, I think it isn't really remembered as a big masterpiece album, but it is. It should be. Number 16 is Björk from Iceland, and favorite album is Homogenic from I think 1996 or 1997, and my favorite song is also from that album. It's the song Yoga. Though I also love the song Bachelorette from the same album, and many albums and many songs, other songs and albums by her as well, of course. Number 15, James, the band James from Manchester. Favorite song is the song Runaground, which was one of only 2 new songs from their Best Of album from 1998. I think it's just called the Best Of James. And it was, you know, on those Best Of albums in the 90s, usually there was one new track that was a single and a second new track, and Runaground is the second new track, so it wasn't even a single, it's the only non-single track on that compilation, but I really loved that song. I think this should have been a single from the Best Of album. And my favorite album by James is Late, which is the most folky album produced by Brian Eno, by the way. And James, you know, what can I tell you about James? They are, you know, they aren't really a Britpop band, although they were a British band that was around throughout the 90s, and you know, had they released the first album maybe in 1994 and their big albums between 94 and 98, I think they would be labeled a Britpop band, but they were around even before, you know, they started in the 80s and were associated with the Manchester baggy scene in the late 80s, early 90s, and they went on, you know, after Britpop ended, they went on and they still put out records every couple of years. But my favorite James albums are the 90s albums, I have to say. Number 14, needs no introduction, Prince. It's Prince, or the artist formerly known as Prince, Dolphin, Symbol, whatever you want to remember him as. Favorite song, it's really difficult with Prince, there are so many songs, but I would say so many great songs, and so many songs, you know, I think he released more than 40 albums in his career, in his not even that long career, you know, in a like 30-year spanning career, he released much more than 30 albums. Favorite song is Raspberry Beret from the Around the World in a Day album, and favorite album is Purple Rain, not very original. Number 13, again, some people would have him higher, but you know, number 13 is pretty good, I would say. David Bowie. Favorite song, Starman. Favorite album, Ziggy Stardust. So again, it's the case where the favorite song is on the favorite album. Number 12, Jorge Ben from Brazil. Very underrated outside of Brazil, or outside of, you know, circles that are very, you know, fans of Latin American music, I would say. But he's up there with the best singer-songwriters of all time. He's associated, you know, he started his career in the early 60s, and therefore is associated with that whole Tropicalia movement, you know, when traditional Brazilian music and samba and those kind of music were combined with Western, American, Anglo-American folk music, psychedelic music, sometimes even beat music, I would say. But George Ben, first of all, was a great songwriter, wrote also many great songs for other artists, like for example, what's it called? I think Minha Menina or something like that. Sorry, forgot the name. The song, which was a big hit for the Brazilian group Os Mutantes, and another very famous song by him is Taj Mahal, because Rod Stewart nicked the melody and was sued by George Ben or George Ben's publisher. The song Do You Think I'm Sexy by Rod Stewart, is based on Taj Mahal. But my favorite song by George Ben is Errare Humanum Est, from my favorite album by George Ben, which is Tabua de Esmeralda, which is one of my all-time favorite albums. I think I once ranked my top 10 favorite albums of all time, and it was somewhere in there, some place like number 6, 7 or 8. Fantastic album. Number 11, artist we often talked about on this channel, Joan Armatrading, most underrated singer-songwriter of all time. So I think David Bowie before that isn't really an underrated singer-songwriter. But the next two, George Ben and Joan Armatrading, both I would consider two of the most underrated singer-songwriters. I would say both are as good or even better as David Bowie, because I have them above David Bowie. Just my personal taste, of course. But Joan Armatrading really did write some brilliant songs, and the mainstream didn't really, with 2 or 3 exceptions, didn't really take notice of that. My favorite song of hers is from her first album, which is also my favorite album by her. This is also a top 10 favorite album of all time for me. The album is Whatever's For Us, and the song is It Could Have Been Better. My 10th favorite artist of all time is Van Morrison. Van Morrison, favorite song is The Healing Has Begun, from his 1979 album Into the Music. And favorite album is his first proper solo album. There was an album before, but he considers this his real debut album, Astral Weeks from. I always forget if it's from 1968 or 69. I think it's from 69. But I'm not sure. Number 9 is Suede. Britpop band, of course. For those who don't know, favorite song was on no album, and it's funnily enough, it's one of those songs that Suede themselves, especially the 2 songwriters of that song, Brett Anderson and Bernard Butler, both hate this song. Both there are quotes by both that they are embarrassed by this song, and they talked about their hatred for that song at the time when they both were fighting, when they both were feuding with each other. So it's one of the few things they still had the same opinion on when they weren't really friends anymore. That this song is crap, but I love this song. It was a single only release. It was on no album. It's called Stay Together, and I couldn't decide what my favorite Suede album is. It's a tie of the first 3 albums. Suede, Dogman Star, and Coming Up. Those are my 3 favorite Suede albums. I like them all about the same. Roxy Music is my 8th favorite group or artist of all time. Favorite song is Same Old Scene from the Flesh and Blood album. And favorite album is Siren from 1975, it must have been. Number 7 is Kate Bush, which is by that, she's my favorite female artist. And not many female artists in the top 25, as I said in the beginning. I'm a bit embarrassed of that, or sorry for that, but that's just how I am, I have to say. Kate Bush is my 7th favorite artist. Favorite song is her debut single. I think it was a debut single, Wuthering Heights. And favorite album is Hounds of Love from, I think, 1985 or 86. Brilliant artist. Number 6, the Rolling Stones. I just ranked my favorite Rolling Stones songs a few weeks ago. So my favorite Rolling Stones song is Gimme Shelter, and my favorite album is Exile on Main Street. Number 5, The Smiths. Favorite song, The Boy with the Thorn in His Side, and it's also from my favorite album, The Queen is Dead, my favorite Smiths album. Number 4, Oasis. So therefore Oasis are my number 1 of the classic Britpop bands. Pulp and Blur were in the honorable mentions, Suede was number 9, and Oasis is number 4. Although I don't really listen to Oasis that much anymore, I listen to Suede much more these days, or these years, I have to say. I think they're not even in my top 50 most listened to artists of the past 10 years, Oasis, but they were really very important. When I was growing up, when I was a teenager in the mid to late 90s, and they were my band. You had to decide what's your favorite band, especially in the Britpop days. First you had to decide, are you Britpop or are you grunge, or are you mainstream music, and I was clearly going for Britpop. And then once you decided that you're a Britpop fan, you had to decide, are you a Blur fan or an Oasis fan? It's a bit silly. You can be fan of both, as you can be a fan of both Beatles and Stones, of course. But at that time you had to make that decision for yourself, and with my working class background and so on, I could identify more with Oasis. Favorite song, Live Forever. Favorite album is definitely Maybe, also the album where Live Forever is on. Third favorite artist of all time, and that's the biggest surprise to myself. I really had to do some soul searching with that list, and I if you asked me 5 years ago, they probably wouldn't have been in my top 10 at that time, but they're getting bigger and bigger and more important to me, and with every passing day, I would say. Maybe one day they will never be my number 1 artist, of course. Number 1 artist is the only artist that will never change. But maybe there will be a number 2 artist someday in the future. It's the Pet Shop Boys. Pet Shop Boys are my number 3 act, and they're releasing a new album in late April. So in late April, early May, as soon as that album is out, I will make a ranking video, I think, ranking the complete, album discography of the Pet Shop Boys. I made a very superficial top 5 favorite Pet Shop Boys albums video when the channel was, soon after I started this channel, and don't watch that video. It was with my old camera setup, and it was even worse. Technically it was even worse than my videos are now, and I'm a bit embarrassed of that video, and even the placements have changed since then. But I did a top 5 album video of the Pet Shop Boys once, but I will make a new video in May when the new album is out, complete all, I think, 15 albums by the Pet Shop Boys ranked. But I can tell you my favorite album and song now, because I have to, according to that list. Favorite song is Love Comes Quickly, second single. It was the second single, and it's from the first album. Favorite album is Introspective from 1988. Yeah, that's, the rest I will tell you when I'm making this video in May. Number 2, make it short because I just made a video, just released, I think it must have been the last video that got released on this channel, my top 10 favorite Bob Dylan songs. So Bob Dylan is my number 2. And when you watch that video, you know that Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands is my favorite Bob Dylan song. It's from the Blonde on Blonde album. And my favorite Bob Dylan album is the album before Blonde on Blonde. It's Highway 61 Revisited from 1965. Number 1 is the same. It's not the same, but it's a bit similar to the case we had with Paul Weller. You all know what number 1 is, of course. If you know my channel, it's of course the Beatles. But with Paul Weller, it was Paul Weller plus all his bands, and with the Beatles, it's the Beatles plus the solo careers. Because how do I integrate the 4 solo careers? Okay, the 3 solo careers, because Ringo obviously wouldn't make the top 25 favorite artists of all time as a solo artist. But how would I integrate them in my top 25? It would be really tough. I can tell you that Paul McCartney would be the highest. Out of those 3, my top 25 would probably be my top 10 or top 5 favorite artists of all time. But it's really hard to compare them with that. I kind of compared the solo careers when I ranked my top 40 favorite Beatles solo albums, so you can look at that video for more on that. But you know, this is number one is the Beatles plus the solo careers. But even without the solo careers, of course, the Beatles would be number one. Favorite song, and that includes the Beatles and the solo careers, is I'm the Walrus, and favorite album is the White Album. You know, I once, at the beginning of the channel, I also ranked all Beatles songs. So I ranked every Beatles song on my channel from, I think, number 215 to number one once, and I'm the Walrus was number one in that ranking. And it still is. I think Now and Then, yeah, of course, Now and Then wasn't yet released when I did that video ranking all the Beatles songs. So if I would put Now and Then into my ranking of all Beatles songs, it would be around number 100 out of 215 or 220 songs. Maybe a bit, maybe 150 or something like that. Yeah, that was the video today. Those were my all-time favorite artists ever. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.